Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Monday night, March 10th, 2025, as we record this new episode. The Chicago White Sox are playing better baseball during spring training as they are now 5-11, not the worst record in Cactus League play, but still behind last year's spring training pace. But they got some good news. Michael A. Taylor and Colson Montgomery returned from their injuries, which helps a lot with the projected lineup for opening day. How does that opening day roster look as we are just 17 days away? In this episode, we'll take our best guesses on who are the front runners to make the roster, plus pitcher Shane Smith drawing a lot of attention in a good way with how he has been throwing. Can he make the White Sox starting rotation? Joining me are Sox Machine's beat reporter James Fegan and managing editor Jim Margulis. As for those that are watching on YouTube, you could actually watch us now on video rather than just the podcast recording, which if you still want to listen to the podcast recording, you could still do that on YouTube. But again, the good news, all about Colson Montgomery's back, Jim. That has been the theme this spring training ever since the back spasms knocked him out for about 10 days, even though Chris Getz said that there was nothing to be concerned about. It was just day to day. But with Colson Montgomery now back, thanks to a better back, is Colson Montgomery still on pace to be the projected opening day shortstop?
It seems like they really want him to. It's partially that. It's partially that the White Sox have really cleared the path for him, and they didn't really add anybody. Josh Rojas can kind of cover shortstop, but that's probably not where they want him every day. Jacob Amaya is getting a lot of playing time, and the White Sox designated him for assignments over the winter. He went to Baltimore for a couple months, I believe. So they were comfortable with him not being around, and now he's back and somehow getting the second most plate appearances or innings at shortstop while Montgomery was out. Actually, the most innings, but he got a lot of the playing time while Montgomery was out. I thought maybe if there were more of a competition, you might see like more Brooks Baldwin there because he might have more major league playing time and the ability to cover a shortstop more effectively to where he might be somebody who could play regularly if all goes well. So because of a lack of a really compelling other option, I would say, it looks like Montgomery is still the one. I get that haunting feeling from following so many White Sox decisions. That kind of eventually trained me into looking at the most cynical interpretation of events or most sarcastic projection of what could go wrong.
Why?
And take that as my
Jim?
base experience.
How could that be?
It has all the markings of why would anybody have expected that to work? Just when you try to reverse engineer their decision based on the most likely outcome. I'm thinking probably the best example of this, or the most clearest one I can remember, is Adam Eaton the second time around. Why did anybody think that was a good idea? Why did they bank so much on him being the primary solution in right field? That's kind of what feeling I have here watching Montgomery miss 10 days because of back spasms, which is not he's had problems with his back before. Had a disappointing year last year, banking a lot on off-season fixes and natural talent coming through. And, the White Sox have been bit so many times by poor planning and the most optimistic projections on players who have very flawed profiles that it does really feel like they're putting a lot on him. But right now you're just seeing Jacob Amaya getting all the run over playing time. And, I'm not sure he's the guy the White Sox want playing there. So until somebody produces, whether it's Amaya or Chase Mydroth or Baldwin, to really put Montgomery behind the competition, then I would assume that Montgomery is still plan A for as long as that lasts.
It's a very small sample size, James, but Montgomery only has one hit in spring training. He's 1 for 9. It's a home run against the Cubs, but he's yet to walk. It's 5 strikeouts. He's only played in 4 games. With that said, does performance at the plate matter at all in the decision-making process for White Sox general manager Chris Getz? Or is it really all about if Colson Montgomery is healthy, he's the opening day shortstop?
I think it matters some. I think if he's just getting blown away upstairs like over and over again and not adjusting, I think if his swing doesn't look right because maybe his back injury is not all the way over, I think those are things to consider. I also think it's a position where, I mean, it'd be a microcosm of how they're kind of viewing last season, but if he looks like crap until the last week of March and then looks pretty good for 3 or 4 games, they're going to be like, all right, he had a little hiccup in spring training, but he got going. He looks like the guy we want. And here we go. So I don't think like it matters in terms of like his overall stat line. I think if it looks like disqualifyingly out of whack all the way up until the start of the season, I think that becomes something you can't really ignore. But as Jim said, as I've said, there's not really competitors in place. Like even Amaya, who's technically the most defensively competent, left the game with hip tightness today. So we're probably looking at like a couple of game absence for him. On top of like what Chase Mydroth is, it's probably a day or 2 away optimistically from when you see him again. And that's probably another person who's a little bit stretched defensively there. Brooks Baldwin. Not that I think it like means a lot for him long term as far as what I view him, but he hasn't looked good in Cactus League, so he hasn't had like a job winning type of campaign. I mean, I kind of think part of the reason why it's full speed on Colson right now at shortstop, besides the route that's obviously just cheaper to not sign a stopgap. But this is kind of a little window to really see if his defense is viable without maybe a lot of consequences in terms of regular season results. He's not holding back a winning team by like trying to see if he can really stick it short, and he's not holding up any of other development projects. It probably takes like an optimistic view of the future to even like see a world where like, hey, Jacob Gonzalez is looking major league ready and is probably a better defender, but like that's theoretically like him being more of a glove first option is someone you could see in the system pushing him off shortstop at some point. Bonnemer is probably another guy like, Caleb Bonnemer will tell you right now he'd move to second base for Colson if you put him in the majors. I think that's true for any like rookie ball level guy, but is more of a bat first prospect. Is not like this true shortstop to move him out. Maybe if William Bergola, one will have to get far enough that I know how to say his name like right off the top of my head. But like that's maybe more your like natural glove first guy who you could see down the road, being like, for both these guys in the majors, one of these guys is clearly a defender. But like even that's like 2 years of projection and a lot more hitting than he showed to really get there. So I think this is probably, the least costly window to see if Colson can actually play shortstop defensively. But yeah, it's a dicey part. I mean, even like the, optimistic kind of views of his struggles last year from an outlet like, I don't know, Fangraphs that, some people work for prospect wise. The more the view of seeing like Colson still having star level tools is that it's just going to be a very long developmental trek for him to get there offensively with what he's shown with plate coverage or maybe just he's never going to really hit balls, above letter high through his whole career, but it's going to be a longer process of him gearing a whole approach around having that kind of vulnerability. So it's weird. You kind of wish they could, I'm sure if they could, or it'd be reasonable, they'd like to pay Elvis Andrus like the league minimum again to pay this over until like it's more reasonable time. But I don't think what's happened yet is enough of a roadblock to get them off of what was clearly plan A, plan 1A, plan 1B, which is a lot of Colson at shortstop.
I wonder, because going back from the previous rebuild, White Sox fans had to be patient with Tim Anderson. He went through a lot of adversity in the 2017 season. He struggled greatly, but there were serious questions of, can he handle the position? That was the whole flirtation with Manny Machado. Like the idea was, hey, if Machado wants to be shortstop, Tim Anderson's not stopping Manny Machado, Jim, from playing shortstop because Anderson was struggling both hitting and defensively at the position. He didn't cement his standing at the shortstop position until that 2019 season for the White Sox. So White Sox fans had to wait like 2.5 years to know for certain if Tim Anderson could handle the shortstop position well enough, both defensively and offensively. Are White Sox fans going to have this? Are they going to give the same runway to Colson Montgomery? Can they wait 2.5 seasons, Jim, to really learn and figure out and believe one way or another that Colson Montgomery is the cornerstone shortstop in this edition of the rebuild?
I think it's slightly different because Anderson looked more like a shortstop. His case was, reps, polish, being a JUCO player and, running up the minor league system pretty quickly on the strength of his hit tool, but still it took some of the refinements, or it took some major league time to get the refinements into place because he was so advanced in the minors and it posed no challenges for him. And the fact that he had, speed, agility, could cover the ground, I think made it easier to buy into that profile. And there's also the case too, that because he did not draw walks, because he didn't hit for like above average power, like he wasn't like a 25, 30 home run guy, that he had to be good at shortstop or had to be like a suitable everyday shortstop for him to capitalize on, his value and make his shortcomings less of a liability. It's something you can live with, less of, oh my God, like now he's playing third base and he doesn't hit 20 homers. Is he going to have a suitable profile? Right now he's playing some center field in Anaheim. I mean, that might have been the backup, I think, in order to have that profile work, is seeing, if he could cover, outfield at an above average range. So like, that's, I think, why Anderson got that long rope in, learning said ropes at the major league level. I think with Colson, because he's bigger, because like everything about him says like he doesn't look like a shortstop. Yeah, he might be a shortstop. That might be just your biases coming into play, and he'll ultimately be okay at it. Once you get past the awkwardness of seeing somebody that big playing the position, that he could be fine there. But I think if the back problems do follow him, if he is like a power over hit guy and he is somebody who can hit 25, 30 homers and draw walks, and all of a sudden you might be like, maybe he's not Corey Seager, maybe he's Kyle Seager, that kind of thought process, then you can easily slide him over and he still provides a lot of value. So I think that's I guess that's the key difference, is that the way his offensive game is supposed to come together with walks and power, I think gives him a lot of backup to be useful elsewhere. Whereas with Anderson, it was really just agility, hit tool, speed, stolen bases, okay shortstop play, great batting average, batting average on balls in play reliant. And you needed really everything to be adequate at best, or adequate at worst, I should say, for him to be like the, what turned out to be an all-star player for that window that was so enjoyable. So that's, I think, where it comes into play with Colson, is just if the power and walk tools are fine, then it's just more a matter of like, what kind of ceiling does he have? How exciting is he versus is he a major leaguer?
I would like to get that feedback, though, for those that are listening and watching, White Sox fans. How much rope are you giving Colson Montgomery? Are you willing to give him 2.5, 3 seasons to figure out the shortstop position? Because it really feels like, James, White Sox fans are hoping that he hits the ground running. But maybe that's just looking for a reason to be optimistic after a 121 loss season. But I think no matter how he's feeling, no matter how he finishes spring training, and I hope that he gets hot. I don't know if he's going to get Romy Gonzalez or my guy, Trace Thompson, 6 home runs so far this spring for Boston. I don't know if he's going to get that hot. It'd be great if he did. But I think, to your point earlier, James, the White Sox are not expected to win, but I still think White Sox fans are hoping that Colson Montgomery can solidify the shortstop position. So that's one less thing to worry about moving forward.
Giolito used to talk about this distinction between like his long-term confidence that he like thought he'd be an above-average starter in the league versus his moment-to-moment confidence, so, like having moments of like I don't know what I'm going to throw here, or I don't know how to get any of these guys out. So like I think on a long-term view, sure, I think Sox fans are like you got to give him, if this is like your franchise shortstop, you have to give him years of runway to figure it out. I think on a moment-to-moment level of watching him, he's not going to get 3 weeks in terms of like, I don't think this is going to work. Or how can someone who doesn't make this play like project long-term? Like as he talked about comparing with Anderson, like you can give Colson 300 games at shortstop, it's not going to make him any faster. So there's probably going to be plays where it's going to invite lots of skepticism, like if what are just going to be long-term range limitations that he's just never going to make these certain type of plays and needs to become more proficient at what he does, the plays he is going to make. I think there's going to be lots of moments like that that are going to be hard to deal with. And given the, at least long term, I know no one's really distinguished himself in spring, but if you're in a position where Baldwin or Mydroth are killing it in AAA and playing shortstop regularly, and Colson's really struggling, I think it's going to be interesting to see how much they're committed towards, him as that guy there, because at least last year, this was not an organization, especially Brian Ramos, if you asked him, that was really committed to like, oh, we're not calling you up until you're here to stay up for good. And if it was very much the idea, like, hey, there might be some use to promoting them, seeing what they're going to do, not letting them really struggle, sending them back to AAA to work on some things, hone in on the way they've been exposed up here. Like this organization kind of ran a pretty steady taxi back and forth last season with some guys that you think would have that status. None of them quite had the status of Colson Montgomery, so this is a really interesting test case. But I would think this organization now with new leadership would be a bit more willing to send him down after 2 bad months than maybe the last rebuild, where things were so concretely built around the crop of guys they got in the rebuild trades that it was clearly always plan A to just call them up and stick with them to the bitter end once you do. So I think there could be a lot of room for differences in that, but it'd be nice if there were some other White Sox hitters playing well to kind of make that more of a open conversation and not just like somebody's got to do something, which is usually not the ideal motivation for making baseball decisions, as much as it presented itself as a consistent motivation throughout last season.
Well, that's Colson Montgomery, and he's back, and let's hope that he has a strong finish to spring training. Taking a look at the rest of the White Sox roster, about, again, 17 days away from opening day. The White Sox have about 2 more weeks of spring training games before they have a few days off, as they have to transport all their goods from Glendale, Arizona up to Chicago, as they'll be playing against the Los Angeles Angels on opening day on March 27th. Let's take a look at the opening day outlook for the White Sox outfield, because there's 2 significant injuries that we've talked about in our last couple of podcasts for those that have listened. And as of right now, Luis Robert Jr. in, Mike Tauchman in, Michael A. Taylor has returned from injury. He'll be part of the 5-man outfield for the White Sox on opening day. But the injuries, Andrew Benintendi, uncertain if he's going to be ready for opening day. Austin Slater's status for opening day is in jeopardy. Oscar Colas looked like he hurt himself trying to make a diving catch and may have sprained his wrist. The remaining 40-man option in the outfield for the White Sox is Dominic Fletcher. So it raises the question with the outfield outlook, just on who is on the 40-man roster right now, James. If Benintendi or Slater cannot go on opening day, how does this White Sox outfield look when they play the Angels on opening day?
I'm going to lean Fletcher. He's got options. He's not someone I think they would necessarily sweat about getting at bats in some major way, as much as that seems like a departure from like primary right fielder a year ago. But Drury has secretly like not really played the outfield much at all in the last few years. So as much as I think he's hit his way onto the team, I don't know if that's like an option you're really depending on him doing. Certainly not as like a reserve depth thing. With carrying Taylor and especially not having, Slater and Benintendi there, where you're maybe exposing Taylor to more regular play than you intended upon signing. Fletcher would give you at least some coverage from having to play him against right-handed starters that you don't like him for, and pretty similar in what you can do with him defensively. Very, very beloved for his defense by Jason Bourgeois. I can tell you that much. He's like his Fletcher and Corey Lee are like base running and defense like his two, like be like the boy type of examples that he uses for people. And I just think it doesn't ask for another 40-man space as some of your NRIs do. I think talent and ceiling and name recognition wise, Joey Gallo jumps out, but he hasn't necessarily jumped out with anything big he's done in spring so far. And now guys like him signing NRIs, they usually have standard outs in their contracts. So whether he wants to go to AAA is a question, but maybe that be more the situation where you really feel good about what he's working on in spring. I talked about swing pass done with him. Mostly I've just seen him take BP with do cage work with a smaller bat that's shorter, that's supposed to keep him tighter turned a little bit. But as far as on-field results, I've seen a rejuvenated Joey Gallo. I don't know if we've really seen that to think oh yeah, put him in the outfield and stuff like that. So I think Taylor is the easiest, simplest, lowest stakes, probably most unexciting for our listener base slide in option where you're covered defensively. You got a platoon partner for Taylor. You don't screw up your 40-man in any major way. He's looked good in camp and you're rewarding him. Seems easy enough.
Jim, how are you feeling about the outfield right now? Again, we got 2 more weeks of spring training games, and it would really help if Slater or Benintendi returned. But if not, how do you like the outfield?
I mean, what James described is kind of the default situation right now, unless Drury takes a turn to where he's playing a lot of left field because the White Sox, somebody emerges as a shortstop. Josh Rojas is the second baseman, or Lenyn Sosa's playing second base a lot, and they want to get Drury's bat in there somewhere, and left field is the way to do it. It's amazing when you look at just the outfielders the White Sox have in camp and how none of them are hitting. I thought maybe Corey Julks has gotten hot. Maybe Zach DeLoach has, made the White Sox rue their, DFAing him off the 40-man roster, but everybody is cold. There isn't even Nick Maton is the hottest of the hot, and he's hitting 233. And Michael Taylor struck out 10 times and 13 at bats, and Joey Gallo struck out 10 times and 19 bats. Bobby Dahlbeck's not doing anything. All their NRIs, are not producing. So nobody is even having a case for a mirage spring to where they could parlay 3 great weeks in Arizona into 3 weeks of diminishing returns in the majors. So I think, the options are, why put a 40-man roster, or why use a 40-man roster spot on a bunch of guys who are not showing it. So I think you probably just try to maybe create a defensive outfield that's so good, and maybe just hope that they hit a lot of fly balls to get over the Montgomery Vargas left side of the infield, if that's what it is. And maybe that's how they try to improve things. It's the infield's not so great, but at least we don't have Gavin Sheets in right field. We have 3 good outfielders, and Mike Tauchman is the weak link in the outfield right now. I think it's a pretty good situation. So you might just see the White Sox pursue some extremes of quality on the margins and see just exactly what that does for them.
Well, the way the outfield is set up, I don't know how you're going to give any off days to Luis Robert. As of right now, I know that was kind of the goal for Chris Getz. Give Luis Robert a couple of games, DHing, get him off his feet. Want to protect him. We're hoping to trade him before the deadline. And if you listen to previous podcast episodes, we had audio thanks to James being there in Arizona, where Getz didn't seem all that confident the free agent market would bring anybody in for the White Sox to help out with the outfield. So Austin Slater, Andrew Benintendi, Oscar Colas, one of you three's got to be ready to go on opening day. So hopefully someone returns. But the outfield, not looking all that deep, which then we move over to the infield, and it brings us to everyone's favorite infielder. And that, of course, is Lenyn Sosa. Lenyn is hitting pretty well in spring training for the White Sox. He has played in 8 games. He's 8 for 19, 6 strikeouts. He has 4 walks. Again, he is out of options for the White Sox. The reason why we're talking about Lenyn Sosa, because when you look at the White Sox infield, and again, around the names, if you're watching on video, they're highlighted in yellow, but for those that are listening to the audio version, to go around the infield, Andrew Vaughn, first base. We are assuming Josh Rojas is going to be the starting second baseman because Miguel Vargas, according to White Sox manager Will Venables, the primary option at third base. And as we talked about at the beginning part of this episode, if Colson Montgomery hits a little bit better, shows that he is ready for major league pitching and his back is not acting up on him, he'll be the shortstop. The White Sox are going to carry 6 infielders. So that's your 4. You got to pick 2 from a list of Lenyn Sosa, Chase Mydroth, Brooks Baldwin, Brandon Drury, Jacob Amaya, and Brian Ramos, which Ramos seems to have been out for most of spring training because he hasn't been able to throw the ball. But now it sounds like he's on a throwing program. Still probably a long shot of making the opening day roster. So when you're looking at this list, Jim, who are the 2 that you're picking right now? Is Lenyn Sosa going to make the opening day roster? Is he going to make me look like a fool because I thought there was really no way before spring training started that Sosa would be making the opening day roster?
It would be weird if he didn't. Just since we've spent the entire 25 minutes so far outlining just how nobody's hitting, aside from like the precious few who are going to be playing every day and like not going to be able to get off their feet, to where you can't really afford to lose an out of options bat for what? Like that's kind of what I look at Sosa for. Like you're getting Chase Mydroth up there earlier than they have to, even though he hasn't produced so far. Like he's looked, I think the at bats are as advertised, just a matter of like, is the contact going to be useful enough to produce? And so far it hasn't, but I think he's going to be somebody who has some kind of meek small samples. Then he has some like BABIP field small samples and it balances out a little bit, just a matter of like where it balances out. But Baldwin can be optioned and he hasn't shown anything so far. Drury, I wonder if he's going to be traded in the last week of March as a need arises for somebody else. And the White Sox just roll with Sosa anyway. So I think it would be Sosa and Drury right now based on how they're hitting, opt-outs or lack of options being in play. And then also Drury, if he is able to cover the outfield just to provide even like 1 day a week type backup, that's better than what the White Sox have run out there in previous years. Like that'd be fine. So it looks pretty clear to me right now. And I think the way Sosa has hit in September, in winter ball, this spring, I think you got to give him a look and have one last decent run to where if he, is still the same guy and just the plate discipline gets away from him and doesn't produce, then you confront the lack of options then, and you risk the waiver wire and say, well, how many samples do you have to give a guy before just looking elsewhere? And I think they could be more comfortable with it then.
James, do you agree with Jim? Would you pick Lenyn Sosa and Brandon Drury out of that pick 2 list, or would you go a different direction?
When you sarcastically introduced everyone's favorite infielder, like 3 or 4 options like flooded to my mind. That Sosa came up was almost like a mild, it fit, but it was also like, oh, this is Andrew Vaughn, or like it could have been anyone really. I have a take on Sosa that I don't agree with, but I want to give airtime to.
Okay.
He is younger than Oscar Colas, Andrew Vaughn, Miguel Vargas, Tim Elko, Sean Burke, Jared Schuster, Jordan Leisure. Just generally still younger than your average like post-hype prospect, especially domestically. And I would say like going through like doing prospect work with Fangraphs just really drives home like how much like the international guys are on this quicker timeline before they hit Rule 5 eligibility with limited spots in DSL and complex that they usually have to work through. You know, you're not a first round pick. You're not just going to rocket to A-ball. There's all just sorts of things where you kind of have to move up for the sake of moving up to survive that I think kind of gear us towards this view of Sosa where we've just seen a lot of him at this stage where he was, you know, immature from a baseball standpoint, where we didn't have to watch a lot of guys who played in college like go through this, and how Lenyn's career trajectory, especially with how precocious he was contact wise, would have been if he played college ball like domestically. You know, I think his major league debut year, I want to say, happened where it would have been like his first full pro season. You know, if he was like just a standard like infielder from Wichita State or something like that. He's someone who attracted attention from, I think, all of us probably really early when he was still in Great Falls, just for like pure contact ability, and has already kind of gone through this probably one more major development iteration than the average like stalled player, in where he developed the ability to really have at least major league solid average you know, power in terms of, you know, being able to impact the ball, exit velocities, just what he's produced in AAA. He's kind of already shown some ability to adjust offensively. Still like an exorbitant amount of chase that's held him back from having any impact up here, but he hasn't been like in a not particularly great period of White Sox offensive development. He showed a bit more growth than I think a lot of guys in that system over that time, and showed some ability to change. So I've watched a lot of Lenyn. I've seen Lenyn do things defensively or just swing at things offensively that I'm like, how is this guy here? I've like beat my head against the wall at the same moments for him. But I also think like everything about him was built to where the things he did that were pretty remarkable probably got underplayed. And the things that he really struggled at were all put on like a major league spotlight level that I think your average like mid-tier college draft pick who you know, doesn't reach the majors till they're 24, 25 is making a lot of these defensive screw ups in high A and double A that we saw him do up here, that made us think like, well, this guy's just not a major league defender. And maybe he's not, because it's been really bad at portions. But I kind of am I want to be a little bit less closed off the idea that he looks really good in spring, or has looked really good pretty much since like the second half of his age 24 season, and now looks like a, you know, a player in age 25. I don't think we should be quite as like exhausted or kind of glazed over looking at it as we might be inclined to be, just because we've seen so much of him. I think if you sent this player to another organization and he was having the spring he's having, I don't think they'd be like, oh, he can really play shortstop now. We're just completely naive about him. But there'd probably be a little bit more like, hey, he's an interesting young player and he's hitting well. Let's see where it goes. And I think he deserves that here. And I would pick him, even if it's a little bit like, oh, brother, this again, just because we've had to watch a lot of his stuff play out on the major league level. Whereas we know separately, intellectually, that maybe a lot of that reasons that he's been in an organization that wasn't really suited to do him favors up to this point, and he's kind of gotten all the way here on gumption, given all the stuff that had to change from the player development system when he was coming through it.
So that's the White Sox position player side. Matt Thaiss, Corey Lee would be the catcher. So that's what you're looking at as far as a 13-man position player front for the White Sox, with Lenyn Sosa, Brandon Drury looking to be the favorites to be those two additional infielders. Again, knock on wood, punch a hole through the nearest wooden object that nobody else gets hurt in the last 2 weeks of spring training for the Chicago White Sox to make this conversation a lot easier. Any significant injuries the next 2 weeks for the White Sox on the position player front, and things get really hazy very quickly. But something I don't want to say is hazy, but maybe the breakout player for this spring training for the Chicago White Sox is right-handed pitcher Shane Smith, who is throwing 98 now. And James wrote a very excellent piece as on YouTube we're sharing as far as the StatCast data so far, where he's averaging 97.2 miles per hour with the four-seamer, mixing in the slider, changeup, and curveball, and he's been lights out. He's striking out more than 34% of the batters that he's faced so far in spring training in 6 2/3 innings. And it's that type of velocity and this type of stuff, James. In previous podcast episodes, we talked about how Brian Bannister and the White Sox strategy pitching-wise in 2025 was, let's get weird. We may not have strikeout artists, but maybe we can have our pitchers induce weak contact, avoid giving up the free passes, and if our defense holds, we can do a much better job on the run prevention side until our strikeout guys like Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz join the White Sox. Well, here's Shane Smith, James. Can he be a blessing in disguise for the White Sox with this type of velocity and the changeup that you wrote about on SoxMachine.com? What are the chances that Shane Smith makes the starting rotation for the White Sox?
Yeah, like they're excited about developing the changeup for him, but I feel like the guy whoever taught him to sit 98, that's really the true genius here. It is fun to see that chart breakdown from Thomas Nestico because one, it confirms that like their ratings about the changeup because it does have as the highest rated pitch on there stuff wise, and it also actually correctly tags the changeup because he's throwing it so hard that Statcast and Synergy and a bunch of other systems have been tagging it as basically a 92 mile an hour sinker. It has been kind of a weak contact pitch so far. I don't feel like I've seen him. If he got any whiffs on it, it was the most recent start, and it hasn't been a ton. It's been a lot more just like ground balls, which is great to get from a changeup. But it does seem like the thing that's make him stand out the most is all of a sudden just sitting 97, 98, and that certainly wasn't something they were touting a bunch at the end start of spring. But the one thing they were going as far as like getting back to the point of like being weird was that he had kind of battled cutting issues rather than being able to throw that traditional four-seamer. Very similar to Dylan Cease 2020 issues where everything was built around having that four-seamer at the top and pitching up and down off of it, throwing breaking balls that tumbled straight down. Cease's slider is a pretty hard, just straight drop more than it really moves side to side. It's not a sweeper. So having that cut and giving away on that was an issue for him. Whereas with Smith, they just kind of thought like, well, what if you just stop fighting yourself and just, this is what your ball does and let's do everything off that. And could that be why he's throwing harder, that he's not fighting himself mechanically a little bit? Could be. He's also, he's a strong lad. He's been filling out. He's not someone who's really projectable. So maybe just strength gains have been part of that. Maybe it's just early spring, and this is a guy who hasn't thrown 100 innings in a season yet, and he's not going to be throwing 98 in August. That's certainly very possible, but it does seem like he's gotten a little comfortable around what his fastball does. It's not going to play for as much swing and miss as his what his stuff profile would indicate. It's just not because it's cutting, it's not going to be a over the barrel pitch. It's not going to be right. It's going to have a little bit of that darting side to side. He has been able to use that effectively. That pitch, that last second strikeout to Shohei Ohtani, his most recent outing, where he kind of nails the inside corner. That's just a pitch that Ohtani kind of gave up on it. And maybe if you're seeing the cutting action a little bit, you're kind of expecting it to keep moving on you to the glove side a bit more. Maybe it was the one pitch that didn't cut as much as others, and that's why he left it. But he's kind of just gearing off like, I'm going to live in on the hands of left-handers with this because that's where the pitch does. And I'm going to throw rather than kind of a sweeping slider, I'm going to throw a bullet where it really just kind of looks like it's a cutting fastball all the way till the end. And with it, he throws a very hard changeup with what his velo's at right now. Certainly what he looks like in spring, it seems like another occurrence of like Lenyn Sosa of hey, I wouldn't necessarily bet on this looking like this the whole way out. But this is a guy competing for a starting job. This is what we brought him in the camp to do and told him to do, and he's doing a better job than anyone else. I don't think there's really been anything wrong with Bryse Wilson. He's looked like the kind of good yeoman sinker baller, weak contact guy they signed up for. It's just like, if this is and maybe he's like a still safer bet to really give you bulk innings over the course of a whole season than what Smith is. But Smith is kind of your more high ceiling thing to chase. They know that they have a lot of arms. I think you could put Sean Burke in this group, or even Tyler Gilbert, since he's mostly a bullpen last year and they're stretching him out a bit, or even Nick Nastrini, who hasn't logged like a ton of innings before, even though he's had healthy seasons. He hasn't had that full major league 180 type innings before. They have a lot of guys that they kind of can't really just do 30 full starts of. So I think there's an avenue for kind of taking where things go with Smith at the start of the season and having an ample supply of like multi-inning relief guys, whether that's Wilson, Gilbert, whether it's Nastrini is part of that as well. But also having like a fair amount of supply of guys that can take over if you're ratcheting Smith down to shorter outings or multi-inning out of the bullpen later down the road, or a bunch of things that you could see him getting to. They don't have a strict Garrett Crochet in the rotation, but they have a lot of guys who we haven't really seen them go much beyond 120 innings. We can see this tapering. But that's where, I wouldn't necessarily count on, Schultz and Hagen Smith, like forcing them in the rotation, but they're really high on Mason Adams. That's somebody who could kind of take over second half of the season if you're seeing a little bit of waning from these guys that you haven't really stretched it for. But I think there's room to kind of take Smith as far as it goes. You're certainly incentivized the Rule 5 pick to not turn away a guy having a good spring. So yeah, I think he should be in the lead for that last rotation spot on what he's showing. If it's purely just about development or trying to find surprises or even just trying to find guys to trade at the deadline, I think you're looking at more ROI or more potential value created by a guy who maybe has upper 90s heat and maybe a plus changeup, as opposed to Wilson being maybe your third or fourth, like, we think he can get quick outs and be a decent back end guy, but you already kind of have with Martin Perez and really certainly this version of Jonathan Cannon, who's maybe not the number 2 or 3 starter, the poor man's Logan Webb that they view him being one day, but certainly right now, especially right now when he's struggling in spring, I think you have a fair amount of shot of those guys. I think Smith represents a chance to do something a little bit different, certainly different look with the cutting action. Why not? He's been fun. Not much about the spring has been that fun. We're talking about the Rule 5 pick and Lenyn Sosa, as far as like the little treats that they can give themselves for what's happened in spring. I think they can embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, with his type of arsenal, if he can rack up some strikeouts, this White Sox team is going to need it, Jim, because, man, if it is a Colson Montgomery, Miguel Vargas left side of the infield, direct all ground balls to second base, please. It could be tricky for White Sox pitchers. So if it is someone like Davis Martin and Jonathan Cannon and Martin Perez and Sean Burke, those are your 4 for sure. If it's between Bryse Wilson and Shane Smith, I think they got to give Shane Smith the chance, because they blew me away by giving Garrett Crochet that chance, because, hey, here's the high velocity guy. Let's see if he can generate some whiffs. Why not go with that again? But this time it's Shane Smith over Bryse Wilson.
Yeah, and Wilson has that experience of going back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen and the swingman lifestyle, whereas with Smith being somebody who's still a prospect and, he's out of that Wake Forest program and you had a Tommy John surgery there. So he had enough pedigree at some point to be in one of the top pitching programs in the country. And, this might be just an indirect way of harvesting the talent, after a Rule 5 pick. And the thing with his Milwaukee track record, it was fine. Like, that's what I think was so surprising about him being available. And perhaps it speaks to the Brewers pitching depth and the way they're always able to get like useful relievers, is that, if a team like the White Sox had a Shane Smith in their system, you'd probably be tearing your hair out at the Rule 5 deadline saying, how is he not protected? How many arms do the White Sox have that are better than him that are on the 40-man roster? Not many. So, put him on the 40-man, figure it out later. I mean, the White Sox were protecting, Juan Corella, and, Juan Corella is fine, but it's a case of like if you had Shane Smith or Juan Corella, you'd go with Shane Smith first just because of proximity to the majors, a little bit more power, and a little bit easier to project a major league arm of some kind. So the fact that he was available, I think might be a little bit misleading, or it might be a case of the skepticism more found in terms of like how the White Sox got him versus what he actually looks like right now. So I think you try to just go with what he's showing you until he stops showing you, and then just have some safeguards in place to where, fatigue sets in, if the delivery starts looking a little bit wonky, release point starts dropping, you have some ways to give him scheduled breaks. If he is like going all out with his velocity and going into uncharted territory for how much power he's delivering and how many pitches he's throwing at that power. But I think the White Sox have backup plans. It is fascinating, though, and I think it's going to be also an interesting year when you hear about the changeups and you hear about Jonathan Cannon. He was the first one, then Davis Martin. Now you hear Shane Smith talking about the seam effects changeups. I think this is going to be a really important year for proving the value of that pitch and just what it means, aside from like playing well and showing up well in terms of pitch behavior and actually how it fills out an arsenal, because they're really touting it, and it would be cool if it delivered on that promise. I think with Cannon, it's been okay, but I think he's always somebody who's been pursuing like what are his top 3 pitches? And so he throws 5 pitches instead of 3 really good ones because he has to round out this arsenal into something that's a little bit more mysterious. So I'm looking forward to seeing this proof of concept with Smith in terms of like, he's got this velocity now, he's got this cutter. You really just want something that moves the other way. So it does seem like a simpler fix or a simpler proposition to add this pitch to fill out his arsenal and take him to the next level. And so, yeah, it's amazing how he went from being, can he be rostered for most of a year to, is he the White Sox 4th best starter right now? And not because disaster has struck everywhere else, but because like he actually looks that good. And there's been just a little bit of missteps along the way.
Yeah, he's been the pleasant surprise. I think the biggest surprise so far in spring training. And just like last year, we were all shocked when Garrett Crochet goes from the debate of, is it even a smart idea to make him a pitcher, to opening day starter, and him just crushing for the White Sox. Let's see if Shane Smith can hold 98 for 5 innings and see if he can generate some whiffs with the changeup and other pitches in his arsenal. And if he's a guy that can strike out 7 or 8 over 5 innings, the White Sox really need those types of pitchers, especially the defense behind the pitchers for this upcoming season. So I say give Shane Smith a shot in the starting rotation. But again, we've got 2 more weeks of spring training games left to go. We'll see how these battles shake out. But with this podcast episode, I feel like we're pretty confident with how the opening day roster is going to look. But of course, with the White Sox, the biggest caveat, as always, is injuries. And who are the last men standing to make the 26-man day roster for the Chicago White Sox? We'll be sending James Fegan back out to Arizona. Again, huge thank you to all of our supporters at Sox Machine. He'll be there for the final week, and we'll be able to get all of the good insight and the news and the quotes from White Sox brass and how that 26-man roster is going to look like going into opening day. So we'll get some final answers soon in the next week or two for the Chicago White Sox. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch and listen to our show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. You can follow us on social media. We're on all the social media platforms, including Blue Sky. At Blue Sky, we're at soxmachine.com. You can follow James on Blue Sky at jrfegan.soxmachine.com. And you can follow me on Blue Sky at josh.soxmachine.com. We're also on the gram. We're on Instagram at Sox Machine. You can follow James at jrfegan. He's been having some cool photos and videos from spring training. And you can follow me at Sox Machine Josh. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.